is a book review about Aguinaldo, a narrative of Filipino ambitions. The picture is the cover of the book.
Who wrote it?
Edwin Wildman, born in Corning, New York, United States in March 9, 1867. He died on November 3, 1932 at the age of 65. He was an American citizen. He was an American editor and author. He was a former vice and deputy consul general at Hong Kong, war corresponding during the Filipino Revolt, special commissioner to China during the Boxer Rebellion. He was a journalist who covered Philippines. He also wrote the books Famous Leaders of Industry, Writing to Sell, The Founders of America in the Days of the Revolution.
What are the main ideas of the book?
The topics include the leadership of Emilio Aguinaldo, the Philippine Revolution, the Philippine-American War, and the goals of the Filipinos during the Spanish and American colonization.
What important events took place in each chapter?
Chapter 1. The author introduced the main character of the story, Emilio Aguinaldo, including details about his childhood, his character, and background. Aguinaldo is also believed to be protected by an anting-anting. And Aguinaldo was admired by a Filipino girl, but the girl is loved by Sergeant Seville. The girl knew that if she left Sergeant Seville, Aguinaldo will be imprisoned and tagged as a traitor. Knowing this, Aguinaldo killed Seville by stabbing him in the heart. Chapter 2. The author mentioned Dr. Jose Rizal y Mercado and his influence during that critical period, the activities led by him as a Freemason and reformer, such as the petition called the Expulsion de los Frailes, and the demonstration in 1886 against the abuses of friars. Also, his persecution and trial. Chapter 3. Enraged by what happened to Rizal, Aguinaldo and the Ponciento Rizal drove away the Spaniards out of Rizal's native province and then moved northward. Aguinaldo issued a manifesto setting forth the first cry for independence and made his headquarters in Biak na Bato in Bulacan. Rivera promised to grant the following reforms. The agreement was signed by Paterno and Rivera, and in December 1897, the leaders left their mountain retreat at Biak na Bato. Also, rebellion occurred throughout Luzon and some parts of Visayas, and Filipinos were united to overthrow the priest-ridden government. Chapter 4. The Spanish-American War occurred for the purpose of putting an end into the miseries of Cuba to restore peace and stable government. The Americans won under the leadership of General Dewey. And the Singapore Free Press on May 4 released a statement saying that Aguinaldo's policy embraces the independence of the Philippines, whose internal affairs would be controlled under European and American advisors. And the American officials were unaware about the whereabouts of the banished insurgent chieftains who had been planning to escape ever since they arrived. Chapter 5. Artaquio is an Ilocano rival of Aguinaldo. He is one of the most powerful men during the First Revolution. Aguinaldo promised not to start a revolution against the United States. On January 1900s, Admiral Dewey said that Aguinaldo never thought of independence. That was an idea that came into his mind later. His one desire was to be allowed to fight, that he might destroy the powers of the friars. Aguinaldo proclaimed himself as a dictator and the president of the Philippine Revolutionary Government and the commander-in-chief of its army. On June 23, he issued his first message proclaiming that the Filipinos want independence from the Spaniards, not assimilation. Chapter 6.
Significant members of Aguinaldo's reign. Dr. Pardo de Tavera, well-known Filipino doctor in Manila. He became the editor of La Independencia. Arellano is the writer of Aguinaldo's letter, the ablest legal mind in Aguinaldo's composite. Apolinario Mabini was the brain of the revolution, a revolutionist by nature and profession. Pedro Alejandro Paterno, head and spirit of the revolution, became president of the Congress. Theodore Sandico, secretary of the Interior Deputy and Colonel. Tomas Mascardo, one of Aguinaldo's best fighters. Severino Las Alas, one of Aguinaldo's chief advisors. Jose Ignacio Paua, repairs and manufactures Lantaca guns, cousin of Aguinaldo. Vito Bellarmino, press agent of Aguinaldo's army, original promulgator of information, pioneer of Filipino newspapermen. Francisco Macabulos Soliman and Mariano Llanera, brigadier generals from the north. Mariano Trias, Aguinaldo's Secretary of War. Filipino rivals of Aguinaldo: Isabelo Artaquio, Francisco Roman E. Velasquez, General Antonio Luna, former Chief of Staff for editors of La Independencia, the unlikely ally of Aguinaldo.
Chapter 7.
Aguinaldo, Mabini, Luna, and Pilar, having secured undisputed sway over the revolutionary government, addressed a letter to General Anderson, communicating the fact that Aguinaldo had proclaimed a dictatorship and that they hoped that the United States government would look upon the struggle for independence with favor. The conceit and assumption of Aguinaldo annoyed Admiral Dewey. There popped up everywhere Filipino flags until every little bangko in the bay carried from 1 to 3 or more revolutionary emblems. Aguinaldo had insurgent forces with him around Manila. He held Spanish priests as prisoners even though General Otis told him to release them. According to him, he will order their release if the Vatican would recognize the cruelty of the friars towards the Filipinos, and if they release their Filipino prisoners that were imprisoned by the Spanish government. The author himself went to Casa Aguinaldo and described the process they have to go through before meeting Aguinaldo, the interior of Casa Aguinaldo, and even what Aguinaldo looks like.
Chapter 8. Aguinaldo was gaining more members across the archipelago. He was almost murdered by poison, but he managed to survive. On October 5, La Independencia, the official newspaper of the insurgents, was started. There were cases of theft being done by Filipinos to the Spaniards and Americans. And on October 22, 1898, Aguinaldo wrote, "The Filipinos desire to live in peace and harmony with the Americans, because they will take care that the Philippines do not return under the odious Spanish dominion." U.S. President McKinley proclaimed the Treaty of Peace between the United States and Spain. The Philippines is now a property of the United States. The news displeased higher members of the Filipinos. In the amended proclamation, circulated in January 4, some Filipinos were given civil positions. It was also said that the aim of the American government is to give a free and independent government to the Philippines. Chapter 9. The La Independencia wrote about the abuses of Americans and are encouraging people to arm themselves against the enemy. On January 1889, the reign of terror began and chaos filled the streets. America owned Cavite and Manila, and all other places were owned by insurgents. The American government promulgated the Constitution of Republica Filipino, which states that the Philippines is free and independent. The American government formed a civil commission consisting of Jacob Sherman, Admiral George Dewey, Major General E. Otis, Honorable Charles Demby, and Dean Worcester. They are tasked to investigate ways on how they can extend their authority in the Philippines. La Independencia wrote about it, claiming that the commission is just plotting against the Filipinos. On February 4, Private Grayson of the 1st Nebraskans killed an insurgent lieutenant and a private as part of MacArthur's orders, which started the war. Following that incident, Manila had become a war zone, specifically in Santa Mesa Road, San Juan Bridge, Marikina Valley, Malate, Pasig, Novaliches, and Guadalupe. Chapter 10. Aguinaldo published a general order to the Philippine Army stating that the peace and friendly relations of the US and the Philippines has been broken. Filipinos saturated houses in Iloilo with kerosene and set it on fire. Manila suffered a similar fate on February 22, wherein Tondo, Paco, and the Bilibid prison were caught on fire. But why do they burn their cities? According to General Luna, they burn all their cities so that if ever they surrender, their opponents will not gain anything substantial. Chapter 11. Filipinos drove away foreigners in the island of Cebu and declared allegiance to Aguinaldo. The revolutionary government in Malolos accepted provisional surrender with laid out conditions such as recognizing Aguinaldo as their true leader. Filipinos and Negros were given American citizenship and are convincing others to accept American sovereignty. State of war existed in every part of the Philippines, and the Americans realized that the insurgent army utilized two military tactics that they use in every attack. Similar to General Luna's statement, Aguinaldo ordered to set fire to towns so that the Americans shall only rule over a dominion of desolation with crops of cinders alone. After that, a proclamation on April 3 declared the grant of civil and religious rights, employment, honest government, education, and reform for all departments. At this point, the opinion of the Filipinos were divided, but both the English and Spanish residents of Manila believe that the proclamation is useless. Chapter 12. After the proclamation, the situation worsened. After a month of battles, the Americans captured 28 towns in 23 engagements, which includes Baliwag and San Rafael. General Lawton, one of the commanders, even said that it would only take 8 more days after that to capture the insurgent government. All their attempts to kill or even meet with Aguinaldo failed because he was always able to escape them ahead of time with his cabinet, like what happened in San Isidro, headquarters of the revolutionary government. Chapter 13. Aguinaldo stood by the statement, "Independence or death." General Otis was called up by the commissioners to consult with the Filipinos, but his condition was, an agreement will only be laid down if the Filipinos accepted the sovereignty of the US. Mabini replied, "Under such conditions, peace will never reign in this country. Only by recognizing our existence as an independent state, a satisfactory solution of the present conflict can be arrived at. If the American government insists upon war, the Filipinos will not refuse to accept. We will go to war. If to save those liberties it is necessary to proceed along the dolorous path of sacrifices, we shall unhesitatingly seek to obtain the cessation of hostilities, because even the most powerful and greatest nations want peace. For only in peace are to be found the true happiness and prosperity of the people." On May 20, General Luna stated, "I detest war and I hate it. But for the independence of the country, it is necessary to accept it. The Americans fought to defend theirs. A continuation of the campaign will finally bring us victory. You must take into account that we have not yet begun. We shall cause more casualties by surprises and ambuscades than by serious defense, without counting." And he is confident that the Philippines will be successful in its desire for independence. Chapter 14. La Independencia contributed largely to the influence of the insurgents. The people treated it like a gospel. The author accused the La Independencia of feeding the popular imagination and filled the deluded Tagalog with tales of triumphs of Filipino arms and the defeats of the enemy. It featured primarily the losses of the Americans and even claimed that the battles had no effect on the insurgent lines. Only 2 defeats of the Filipinos were mentioned. Only Iloilo, Cebu, and Bacolod had the American flag. And Wildman accused the insurgent government of writing all those achievements in accounts just to manipulate the people. Chapter 15. Filipinos were given hope by other Americans who sympathized with them, thinking that there is a party that can overthrow the American government. On June 12, 1899, it is the first anniversary of the Filipino Republic. Aguinaldo addressed the people saying, "Filipinos, let us be constant, faithful. Let us bind more strongly the cords of unity and end the conflict crying. Long live independence, long live the union of the Philippine people, long live the Army of Liberation." Chapter 16. By June 3, Antipolo, Taytay, Canita, Teresa, Morong, Binangonan, and Nangono were surrendered or captured by the Americans. Other natives began surrendering, holding white flags to be able to return home, while other battles occurred in Parañaque, Bacoor, Zapote, and Imus on June 8. The Green Book, which was directed to Filipino traitors and the servile and false Democrats, says that if we want to continue to live in Manila, in addition to all that has been demanded, we must take, without mental reservation, an oath to give up our native land for the benefit of the imperialists. On June 5, when General Luna visited Aguinaldo, he was denied admittance. When he was forcing himself to get in, an assassin shot him twice and Colonel the man after. Upon Luna's death, Aguinaldo claimed Luna's troops and executed an attack in San Fernando, near MacArthur's headquarters. The Macabebes were against the revolutionists and joined the troops of the Americans instead. This is said to be the last proclamation of Emilio Aguinaldo. Chapter 19. On October 1899, the Americans were able to control the most populous and wealthy sections of Luzon, such as Morong, Bulacan, Bataan, Pampanga, Cavite, and Manila. The Americans were now targeting Aguinaldo. They went to Tarlac knowing Aguinaldo was there, but he got away ahead of time. He was rumored to have escaped to the mountains of Baguette. On December 15, the pursuit for Aguinaldo was abandoned by General March because of depleted army. General Pio Del Pilar died in his encounter with General March at Tila Pass, while the insurgent army left behind Aguinaldo's wife and child. General Lawton also died. Even though his soldiers had warned him, he still stood fearlessly and exposed shot by bullets. At the end of 1899, the parts of Cebu, Panay, Negros, and the entire Jolo was under the control of the Americans. The fall campaign has driven the insurgents up to the mountains. Chapter 18. On June 21, General MacArthur issued an order for the insurgents, granting them amnesty if they will surrender with a span of 90 days and will take an oath of allegiance to the United States. Anyone is offered to surrender the rifles in exchange for 30 pesos. Aguinaldo spent a year hiding. It was not until February 1901 that his whereabouts were discovered. The clue was gathered through his insurgent courier, which was tasked to give an order to his cousin, Baldomero Aguinaldo. The order was in cipher, and his courier offered the Americans to lead them to the place he is hiding. The revolutionary government had come to an end. Chapter 17. Emilio Aguinaldo was caught and arrested after the warfare. Instead of putting him in a dungeon or boiling him in oil, he was put in the quarters of the palace. This is where he realized the futility of his actions. He wrote and signed a letter to all of the Filipinos, stating his decision to let the Americans' policy and sovereignty be acknowledged and accepted throughout the Philippine archipelago. He also said that there has been enough blood and desolation and enough tears that are shed by the Filipinos. And through this, he believed that he is still serving his beloved country and hopes for the peace and happiness to come. What does the ending tell us? The ending tells us that Aguinaldo might have failed to achieve his ambitions for his country, but he, along with his fellow Filipinos, fought for as long as they could. They have lost lives and properties, but it did not stop them from defending what is theirs. Also, they may have failed, but their bravery and patriotism will be immortalized, not only in the books but also in the hearts of the Filipinos. How did the author write the book?
The book is written in first person's point of view. The author occasionally mentions his thoughts throughout the book, meaning some parts of the book is subjective. In terms of readability, the book is well written and understandable.
How did the author make use of primary and secondary sources?
The book is mostly made up of primary sources since the author is an eyewitness of the events. He uses those sources along with illustrations of people and sceneries in giving minimally biased narration.
What is the intended purpose of the book?
Luckily, the author included a note that says that the intended purpose of the book is to narrate.
Was the book useful?
Yes, the piece is well written and gives an abundant amount of first-hand information that comprises a large part of Philippine history. Also, to us as students studying Philippine history, this gives us a different approach to explore.
Does the book contain special contributions?
The book does mention violent activities done by the Filipinos such as burning of buildings and execution of fellow Filipinos that are not commonly read in textbooks. It gives us an insight of how we were viewed from the eyes of the colonizers. It gives vivid descriptions rather than broad ones, making it easier to comprehend and visualize the events.
What are its shortcomings?
Other than public statements of the Filipino officials, there was no input coming from Filipinos. The author does not even mention sources gathered from the opposition.
What are some memorable aspects of the book?
Our forefathers were given numerous chances to peacefully surrender, but they declined all of them. They had only stopped when their leaders were captured or killed. Independence or death was their only options. Filipinos were feared after the war that they were not even allowed to have knives at dinner tables.